In this demo, I will show you an in-depth tutorial on pptXTREME Photoshop import. First, let's start with a simple Photoshop document. I'm going to Alt-Tab to Photoshop. Here we have a Photoshop document with 11 layers, all separate elements with transparency. Now I'm going to go back to PowerPoint. I'm going to create a new PowerPoint document. And I'm first going to save as. It does have to be saved. I'm going to make it a blank layout. Next thing I'm going to do is set the DPI, because I know that my Photoshop file is 1920 by 1080. So we do have to set the DPI for pptXTREME to know how to size these things. Now I'm going to go to Photoshop Import, which you could see here, also available from the pptXTREME ribbon. I'm going to discuss everything on the dialog here. First, you could browse for a Photoshop file and have it open and it's searching for Photoshop documents, or you can just click here to import from the currently active Photoshop document, which is what I decided. You see then it loads all the layers into this menu here. The first column here chooses which layers you want to import. Anything you uncheck here will not be imported. Anything you check will be imported and defaults to what was visible in Photoshop. So because they're all visible here, they all come in defaulted to check there. The second column is the layer name. That just shows you the name of the layer in Photoshop. File type, this is what gets exported. If you select background, it will export to a JPEG and become the background in PowerPoint rather than an imported layer. Other options are obviously JPEG, PNG, or TIFF. And you can select that for any layer. Trim, this will crop each layer to exclude transparent pixels. If you uncheck this, if you want your layer to be the full size of the original Photoshop document, usually you want that trimmed. Grow bounds, we're going to talk more about that in a moment. Stick around to the end because I think you'll find it quite useful. Down below is the settings for all rows. By selecting any of these, I can change all the rows at once. So I can say easily unselect all and then just select a few of them, or I can tell all the rows to go as a JPEG or a PNG file. For now, I'm just going to keep that. I'm going to make the bottom one a background because that is a full screen opaque piece. Export from Photoshop properties. pptXTREME Photoshop Import does not just take your layers directly into PowerPoint. It first exports a file, which you can save or delete later, and then inserts that file into PowerPoint. This is the folder that the files get exported to. You can type it in or you can click Browse. pptXTREME is smart. It will remember the folder you last used for each presentation. File name prefix. The file name for each layer will be what you type in this box. I'm going to type in pptX logo plus the layer name above. Import to. Here you select the slide you want to import to. You can select the selected slide, a new slide, or multiple slides, which will make a new slide for every X number of layers. I'll run a specific example of this later. Okay, let's run this and see what we got. It's now exporting each layer to a PNG file or a JPEG in the case of the background, and then importing them into this Photoshop document. You can see what we have now is a slide with a background layer and the 10 layers that are all trimmed and ready to be animated. Let's say I want these shadows that are currently separate objects to be combined with their actual layers on top. And let's notice these dim layers back here. See how they fall off the edge of the page and therefore get cropped off? Let's say we want to fix that as well because we want to animate that layer on. If we animate it from left to right, you'll see the chop mark of where that gets cut. Let's say we want to adjust for that too. Oops, I undid one too many. So here's how we'll handle that. First, let me go back to Photoshop. Okay, and I'm going to take, the X and the shadow, and I'm going to group them. and I'm just going to call that X. And I'm going to do the same with these two that are essentially, you know, that and its shadow, and I'm going to group that as well. pptXTREME will import a separate element for each of the first level of groups. So these two will get combined and export as a single element. If you collapse all groups, everything on that first level will be exported as an individual shape. Now what about those background elements? You could see in these three layers down here, if I move them around, there is in fact enough content that falls off the screen. It just gets chopped off because of our the size of our image. We'll fix that in a moment. And just for fun, let's add another layer to illustrate the file type column. So I'm going to place a new layer. Let's just put up in here because this layer, you notice this layer doesn't have any transparency. It's a fully opaque piece, and I'm going to move that to the top. Okay, so now back to PowerPoint, and let's make a new slide. Again, click on Photoshop Import and import from currently active document. Now notice that the layers that used to be multiple layers with a shadow are now listed as a single element. Now let's click grow bounds for the three dim layers and set their grow bounds to by 500. Right, so these three dim layers here, we're going to grow bounds, and 500 pixels should be enough. What this does is before pptXTREME exports this layer, it increases the canvas size in Photoshop by the number of pixels entered in this spot. Then it goes about process of trimming and exporting. Then we're going to change the icon layer that we added to JPEG because that doesn't need transparency. Okay, everything else we'll just leave as default, and let's see what we get. Okay, my grouped items are now combined, and my dim layers are now have the information falling off the page. So if I wanted to animate this in place, it doesn't cut off the information. Now let's talk about the information that is saved after you use Photoshop Import. Note, all the images inserted here are embedded in this presentation. That means you can open this file on any computer without transferring the Photoshop or any of the exported files, just like when you normally insert images into PowerPoint. But pptXTREME knows where the images came from. If I select the X and activate the pptXTREME ribbon, which, by the way, you can hit Control-Shift-X to do at any time, and click Info Update from Photoshop. By the way, you can also select this by right-clicking on any shape or any image and selecting it from the context menu. Here you're presented with a ton of information. The first line tells you that all path information is relative to the path where your presentation is saved. The next box is the path to the original Photoshop file. Click on the clipboard to copy that path to into your clipboard. If you click here, it'll find the Photoshop file in Windows Explorer. You could see it just selected it right there. And clicking on this will attempt to open the Photoshop file. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and close that Photoshop file, and I will save it, and show you here that by clicking on it, it says success. And if I switch to Photoshop, you can see it opened it and found it and selected the layer that I had selected in PowerPoint. Below that, you see the information related to the file that was exported. You see here we have the path for the ping file. If you click here, it'll copy it into your clipboard, and clicking here will again select it from a Windows Explorer window. Now let me quickly animate two layers to demonstrate something. For some quick effects, I'm going to use previously saved animations in pptXTREME effects library. So I'll apply that one there, We'll apply this there. We'll show our animation pane, and we'll make this happen with previous. Start at 5 and play all. You can see what we have now. Now let's go back to Photoshop and change a couple of these layers, right? Just for fun, let's go in here and let's add a layer effect for a color overlay and make that screen. And let's do the same to this. We'll just copy that up there. All right. Not the prettiest thing, but it'll serve the purpose to show our demo. So we'll minimize that. We'll go back to PowerPoint now. And we'll go into the X and we'll right click and go to PSD import and replace. So what we're going to do is we're going to re-import this layer. And the choices in this box will affect how it gets sized and positioned if the sizes are different from the original. But in our case, they'll do exactly the same thing. All of them will do exactly the same thing because the original and the change layer are exactly the same size. So going back to Photoshop for 1 second, just to make sure I've selected the right layer, I have to select the layer I want to bring in, and I'm going to click Replace. And you'll see that that's replaced. And I'm going to do the same to this layer, jumping back to Photoshop to select that and replace. And you can see not only did it replace the layer and put it back in its position, but it kept all the animation for everything on the slide. Lastly, let's talk about the option to import to multiple slides. This is useful for things like a words graphics where you may have a name and a title and a photo for each slide, but have all the slides in one big Photoshop file. Here's another example. Let's go into Photoshop. I have a presentation here set. I have a background and I have 4 layer sets, each with multiple elements I want on separate slides. If we click down here, you could see each one has a piece of text, a little glow bar, and then a photo. And I have the same setup in all these layers. I'm going to show all layers, and I'm going to hide the background because I already have a PowerPoint file with the background set in the master. Next, I will ungroup all to the first level because if I imported right now, each of these pieces, the text and the glow line, will come in as one piece. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to ungroup layers, which means that all those pieces are now separate as needed. I'm going to go back to PowerPoint, actually to this presentation, which is all ready. Let's close that. And we're going to go import from Photoshop, import currently selected. And now, of course, I have all these layers selected, but in this case, instead of the selected slide, I'm going to import to multiple slides. And I'm going to make a new layer make a new slide every 3 layers. And we'll click OK. This one may take some time, of course, as there are a lot of layers inside each layer set, but obviously much, much less time than it would take to do all this manually. Okay, and there you have it. It has taken each of the layer sets and separated the text and the bar and the photo, and it has done it, for all the slides in there. That's it. I hope you found this video informative. Be sure to watch all our videos to ensure you're not missing out on any of the new features of PPTXTREME.